Hey guys, it's Vinny G Gamer here, and welcome to the second part in my Yu-Gi-Oh tutorial video. Last time we went over everything in the main deck, monsters, spells, and traps. In case you missed it, I'll put a link down in the description below so you guys can watch it and get all caught up. But today, we're going to be going over monsters in what is known as the extra deck. As a quick side note, before we get into the monsters in the extra deck, I wanted to go over a traditional Yu-Gi-Oh board, where stuff goes and what everything does. So, the main deck always goes in the bottom right corner of the board to the player's right, and the extra deck, which we'll cover in today's video, always goes to the player's left in the bottom left corner. And you'll see that I set up a pretend opponent's deck so that it should be on their right, their main deck, and then their extra deck will be on their left. Now in the main deck, I mentioned in the last video that there are monster cards. When you want to summon a monster, which I'll explain how to summon in a later video, you always summon monsters from your main deck in the main monster zones. Now for those spells and traps I was telling you about last video, we'll go in the corresponding spell and trap zones. And for those wondering what these blue and red crystals do, these pendulum zones, they're called pendulum zones, and I'll go over these when we discuss pendulum summoning later on in the video. And then second lastly, there's the field zone. So if you have any field spell cards, that's what makes them special, is that when you activate a field spell, if I can find it, there it is, they always go in the field zone. So for example, this mountain card, remember it from last episode? It's a field spell. So when you activate it from your hand, it goes in the field spell zone, or the field zone. And then now, lastly, there's the graveyard. Any monster that's destroyed, or any spell or trap that has been used, goes to the graveyard, where you can either bring it back later, depending on what kinds of spell and trap cards you have and monster effects, or what have you. But usually when something's destroyed or something's used, it goes to the graveyard. And one more thing before we end it off here is these extra monster zones. Now, when the link monsters were introduced, I'll explain link monsters when we get to that point in the video, but when link monsters are link summoned, they go in this extra monster zone. Now the first monster that goes in the extra deck that I want to explain is fusion monsters. And fusion monsters are these purple monsters, like Dark Paladin over here. Now how do you summon them? Well, if you look at the beginning of the bottom text there, every fusion monster always states what its requirements, or as some people like to call it, the ingredients, what the ingredients are. So for example, Dark Paladin, in order to fusion summon it, you need to fuse Dark Magician and Buster Blader, which I have right here. Now, how do you just fuse them together? Do you mash them up together? Do you stack them on top of each other? How do you fuse? Well, in order to fuse two monsters together, you need a spell called polymerization. Once you have this in your hand, all you need are the appropriate materials and this card to then fusion summon a fusion monster. So now I'll show you guys an example on how to fusion summon. So let's say hypothetically we're given this opening hand. That's right, I'll just lay it out for you guys to see. Okay. So now, if I want to fusion summon, I can activate polymerization. I'll activate it in the appropriate spell and trap zone. Then, by sending the required fusion materials, Dark Magician and Buster Blader, to the graveyard, I can fusion summon Dark Paladin. One last thing I want to mention about fusion summoning, let's start with the same opening hand that we just did a second ago. Now, another thing I wanted to point out was that you can also use monsters that are already on your field for a fusion summon. So let's say hypothetically, I summoned out this Gazelle, King of Mythical Beasts. Now we'll get to how to summon monsters in a later video, but let's just say hypothetically, this monster's out on the field, I can still activate polymerization, fuse my Baphomet from my hand, send it to the graveyard, and my Gazelle from the field to the graveyard, so I can fusion summon, voila, Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast, which, if you see, the requirements do state, at the start of the text, it requires Gazelle, the King of Mythical Beasts, and Baphomet to fusion summon. So, that's the last thing you have to know about fusion monsters, is that you can also use monsters from your field as fusion materials for a fusion summon. The next type of monster I want to go over that's in the extra deck is the Synchro monster. You can tell it's a Synchro monster because the card is white. So in order to Synchro Summon, you need a monster that specifically says at the top of the text that it's a tuner. Once you have a tuner and another non-tuner monster that doesn't, for non-tuner meaning it doesn't say tuner over here, you need their levels, aka the stars, that's what we discussed about last video. You need their stars to add up the exact total of the Synchro monster's level. So for example, I have the tuner monster Top Runner and the non-tuner monster Doom Donuts. Level 4 and level 1, which adds up to level 5, so I can Synchro Summon Scarred Warrior. The next type of extra deck monster I want to go over is Eggsy monsters. No, it's not XYZ, it's pronounced Eggsy. I know, it's really confusing. But in order to, you can tell it's an Eggsy monster because the card is black. And one quick side note before I get into how to summon it, see how these are black stars? Just to clear up the confusion, this is not a level. Eggsy monsters all have what's known as a rank, which still, it's the same amount. There's still the minimum rank you can have is 1 and max is 12, just like levels, but it's referred to as a rank. And that'll come important when you actually start using these. But how do you summon one? Well, just like for Fusion and Synchro monsters, the requirements are stated right at the top of the bottom text. So in order to summon number 39 Utopia, you need 2 level 4 monsters. How do you do this? Well, in order to Eggsy summon, you need 2 monsters, 2 or more, some require 3 monsters, of the same level, and then you do what's known as an overlay, where you stack them on top of each other, and then you're allowed to Eggsy summon. Like that. The next type of extra deck monster I want to go over is Link monsters. Now you can tell it's Link monsters because there are these blue cards that do not have any levels, they have no defense points, and instead they actually have what's known here is a Link rating. So for example, Honeybot is a Link 2 monster, that's its Link rating. Decode Talker over here is a Link 3, that's its Link rating. But how do you Link summon? Well, just like with Fusion, Synchro, and Eggsy monsters, Link monsters always say their requirements on the top of the text, or the top of the bottom text. So for example, in order to Link summon Link Spider, I need 1 normal monster. So hypothetically, if I had this normal monster, Bitron, says it's normal, on the field, I can send him to the grave in order to Link summon Link Spider. Now, you'll notice that Link monsters have these arrows. Well, I'll show you an example in just a minute, but these arrows are known as Link arrows, and these can actually open up more zones and more opportunities to Link summon more monsters. So now, if I wanted to Link summon Honeybot over here, which requires 2 Cyberus monsters, and I already had Link Spider on the field, let's say hypothetically, I have Link Spider out, and I have 2 Cyberus monsters. I can then send these 2 Cyberus monsters to the grave in order to Link summon my Honeybot. And I can put it right to the zone where this Link Spider is pointing to, because now it's opened up another zone for me to put out another Link monster. And one more thing I want to go over with Link monsters is that, let's take a look at Decode Talker. You'll notice that even though it's a Link 3 and would normally require 3 monsters, why does it say it needs 2+ effect monsters? What's up with that? Well, you can actually use other Link monsters, like Honeybot for example, to Link summon a more powerful Link monster like Decode Talker. So let me show you an example. So let's say hypothetically I have my Honeybot and Link Slayer on the field, and I wanted to Link summon my Decode Talker. I actually could, because Honeybot is a Link 2, it has a Link rating of 2, meaning it can count towards 2 plus the 1 monster, that's an effect monster, to add up to 3 to bring out Decode Talker. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I said to remember the extra monster zones, because those are important for Link monsters. So let me show you, if I were to Link summon. Let's say, hypothetically, I had my Bitron out, which is a normal monster, and I wanted to Link summon that Link Spider. Well, I could send it to the graveyard, and then if I were to Link summon Link Spider, it would go either here or here. You can only choose one, you can't choose both, because whichever one you get, your opponent gets the other one. So let's say I wanted to Link summon my Link Spider, it would go here. And now, as I mentioned, there's that Link arrow that points down to this monster zone. So now this monster zone becomes another option for me to Link summon another Link monster. So now, hypothetically, let's say that Link Spider's already out in the field. and I'm summoning out Ram Clouder and Link Slayer. I can then send both to the graveyard for another Link Summon of Honeybot. But where can I put Honeybot? This is, because I already have this zone, this is for my opponent. I can't take both. Well, thanks to the arrow, I can now bring Honeybot down here. And lastly, see how I have one effect monster and then Honeybot, which is a link 2. I can then actually link both of these to the grave because it's 2 or more to link summon Decode Talker. Now this last one's a doozy here, folks, so grab some popcorn because it's going to be a long explanation for this next type of monster. And to be fair, this one actually doesn't go in the extra deck, but I'll explain why I put it in this video. But the next type of monster I want to go over are Pendulum Monsters. Now they look really, really cool, but there's a lot to explain about them. So if you can see by the design of these Pendulum cards, you can see they have like a greenish bottom half, kind of like a spell card. Let me pull up the spell card to reference. See, it's kind of in the same color. Well, that's because Pendulum Monsters are actually a cool hybrid of monsters and spells. How do I know this? Well, this monster, Dynamis Spinos, for example, actually has 2 effects. Its Pendulum ability, which is what you would use if you were using it as a spell, and its original monster effect. Now, where do you go to tell which is which? Well, the text here in the uppermost box is its Pendulum effect, which is what you'll be using if you decide to activate it as a spell card, which I'll show how to do in just a minute. And then, secondly, its monster effect is down here in the box where a lot of other monsters have their effects, which is that's just its regular monster effect. Now, the next thing I want to go over are these crystals, because I'm sure you saw it on my board and on these cards. These have crystals. These cards rather have crystals and numbers on them. What does that mean? Well, it actually contributes to something called a Pendulum Summon, which I'll go over now. Let's use a hypothetical board, for example, and this hand. So we have these 5 cards to start with. Now, I'll show you how to Pendulum Summon. This will be an example. So, I have these 2 Pendulum cards. I can actually set them in the Pendulum Zones. That's what these 2 crystals were for to start with. I can activate one here and one here. And now I have what's known as the Pendulum Scale that's ready to Pendulum Summon. So, how do you know what you can Pendulum Summon? Well, you have to look at the crystals here and what the numbers say. So you can actually special summon as many monsters from your hand or the extra deck, which I'll explain why you can also Pendulum Summon from the extra deck. But you can special summon monsters whose levels have to be in between the 2 scales. So, for example, I have the Pendulum Scale set with a Scale 3 and a Scale 7. So that means I can Pendulum Summon monsters, as many monsters, so long as their levels are between 4 and 6, because that's every number in between these 2 boundaries, if you will. So, if we go back to my opening hand, I can actually Pendulum Summon my top runner, because it's between levels 4 and 6. Let's use the same hypothetical hand as before, these 5 cards. In addition to using them as spell cards and for Pendulum Summoning, don't forget that Pendulum Monsters can still be used as monsters. So, let's say I wanted to summon this Pendulum Monster, because it's level 3, in attack mode. I could still summon it like a normal monster, but I can't use its Pendulum effect because it's in the Monster Zone and not the Pendulum Zone. And the last thing you need to know about Pendulum Monsters is when they're destroyed, they actually go, instead of to the graveyard, they go to the top of the extra deck face up, where they'll be lying in wait to be Pendulum Summoned back to the field. That's why earlier when I said you can Pendulum Summon from your hand or for the extra deck, you can also Pendulum Summon monsters back from the extra deck back onto the field, and other monsters from your hand. So let's just say hypothetically this was destroyed and sent to the extra deck. I can then set if I wanted to Pendulum Summon it back, I can set out this Pendulum monster, and then let's say I had another one that was scale just scale 2, for example. I could then Pendulum Summon this monster back, but it would have to go in the extra monster zone. And then I can also Pendulum Summon monsters from my hand if I had the appropriate Pendulum card. And that's Pendulum Monsters. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, leave a comment down below if you can or if you want to, share the video, and most importantly, subscribe. My goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, so let's do it. Peace.